Logical fallacy for the day is the burden of proof, saying that the burden of proof lies not with the person making the claim, but with someone else to disprove the claim. For example, Bertrand declares that a teapot is, at this very moment, in orbit around the sun between the Earth and Mars, and that because no one can prove him wrong, his claim is therefore a valid one. You see, the person arguing in the affirmative, the one making the claim, is responsible for providing the evidence, the reason. This is some pretty basic stuff for argumentation. You're supposed to give somebody a reason for what he believes. I hate it when churches do this. They say, believe this, not because you have a reason to, but simply because I said so. That's not a reason. Give me a reason. Burden of proof. Welcome back to Reasoned Refrain, where it is my goal for you to know what you believe and why you believe it, and to preach the gospel of resurrection by grace alone, through faith alone, over and over again. I am your host, Stephen Curto. Please stop writing to the show. I hate getting your messages sent to Stephen at reasonedrefrain.com. That's Stephen, S-T-E-P-H-E-N, at reasonedrefrain.com. That's the correct spelling of Stephen, by the way. Don't do it. Don't send me any messages. Drink of the day is a Rob Roy with a lemon garnish made with Johnny Walker's signature celebratory blend and all of the other normal ingredients for a Rob Roy. If you don't know, I learned this. I think I learned this on the show from doing the show, that a Rob Roy is the name for a Manhattan made with scotch instead of bourbon. And I quite enjoy Rob Roy's. Go figure. Let's see. Today, like I said, I promised last week that we would discuss guns and gun control and the shooting. So we'll go ahead and get into the meat segment and start talking about that. Here we go, meat segment.
The meat segment.
Yes, we eat something's flesh. I want meat!
For the meat segment, what I wanted to do was lay out how this argument usually goes and the arguments you usually hear after a mass shooting. Like I said last week, I wasn't really in the frame of mind to talk much about it. I think that is the wiser option. On many issues, this issue in particular, though, you tend to say silly things if you speak out of emotion instead of reason. Case in point, there's a article that I wrote on gun control back in 2018. It's still up on mygiveonthings.com. I agree with about half of what I wrote back then. My views on some of those things have changed. And I wrote that article pretty closely after a mass shooting. I think I tried to take like a little bit of like a breather, but it still wasn't enough. And I was allowing a lot of the emotional appeals to cloud my basic logical reason. And so I fully admit that my views do change sometimes. And back then I held to what I wrote in there. Particularly, I think I said red flag laws were okay, and that citizens shouldn't be allowed to own tanks. And I disagree with both of those things now. But I wanted to just kind of go through and highlight the buzzwords and the lines you will usually hear from the anti-gun lobby and provide responses to them. Basically, here's your argument, here's my counter-argument. And so I'm going to put the words of the anti-gun lobby into a bit of a high-pitched, annoying voice, because that's usually how they come out. And I do this mostly just for my own enjoyment, and so that you can keep clear when something is being said by this hypothetical interlocutor. So the voice that I will be doing will be the "do something" voice. Why don't you do something about this? Is the voice that you'll hear for the pro-gun lobby, and it is mostly just because I like making fun of it. So that is the number one where most of these usually start, which is do something. We have to do something. Do something. And the argument do something is basically never a good argument. It's vague. It suffers from the logical fallacy of ambiguity and from lacking proof, hence the logical fallacy of the day being burden of proof. You need to supply the something that you plan on doing, that you want me to do. The scream into the thin air, do something, is brought on by emotion, not brought on by reason. And the decisions made in response to the do something argument are always bad decisions. They always lead to tyranny and death. This was one of the primary motivating arguments for all of the COVID decisions, the lockdowns. We have to do something! There's a virus, do something! And do something isn't going to work. And so let me try and I realize I've already offended so many people just by the way I've introduced this, but let me try and extend an olive branch. Look, I grieve too. I get very angry whenever one of these mass shootings happen. Like I said on the show last week, I get angry and sad for two reasons. One, just the sheer evil of cold-blooded murder. It's hard to put into words strong enough the sort of retribution that I would wish upon those who commit such acts. If I were there, I would blow that guy's brains out, no question. Which gets into one of my future suggestions. I get that in the face of evil, you want justice. And unfortunately, simply asking for something or justice on an issue like this that is pretty complex, it's simply not as straightforward as you would like it, and most of the some things provided aren't going to do what you're asking. Simply saying do something isn't going to help. You have to say the thing that you want done. And unfortunately, most of the people motivated by emotion or greed have the same lines. Do something. The lust for power. Those people are saying do something at the same time as the people who are genuinely distraught are saying do something. And so when you're genuinely distraught, you have to have the presence of mind not to say what the greedy and power-hungry say. You have to distinguish between yourself and them. And the greedy and power-hungry are all for the do-something emotionalism that allows them to grab power from the average man and locate it within themselves and their colleagues, particularly amongst the federal government. Specific proposals would be helpful. And so, once you get past the emotional state, after the do something, usually the first big claim that's made, as far as a proposal given, is banning guns would stop it all. We have to ban the guns. Unfortunately, that's not true. I guess I will start with asking the interlocutor who's saying banning guns would stop it all. I would say, why should we ban the guns? Like, let's start there. Why should we ban the guns? If it'll stop it all isn't enough. Usually what comes up next, if not in so many words, it's something along the lines of guns are bad. Guns are evil. Guns are killing machines. And I agree with the final statement. Guns are machines designed in order to cause physical harm usually to living things. You usually have a gun in order to shoot something that is living and stop it from living. That is the tool, and that's its purpose. I'm inclined to think that physical harm is not always wrong, as I mentioned offhand. If it were me there, the shooter in Uvalde would not have brains pretty quickly into this encounter. Or I wouldn't. One of those two things. I think that physical force, deadly physical force, is necessary in a fallen world. And I think that it is good and right for those among us who are redeemed and who do have a certain amount of responsibility and ability to exercise that responsibility. We should use that deadly force on occasion in certain extreme situations. Bringing down a mass shooter, I think, would be one. And the reality is everybody agrees with that. Everybody recognizes that somebody has to show up with a gun to stop the bad guy with a gun, which belies the idea that guns themselves are bad. I know that we want to live in a world where guns are bad. Guns are tools used for creating physical harm in another person, used to kill. They are killing machines. Not all killing machines are inherently immoral. Some killing is appropriate. And I don't have a whole lot of biblical references in this episode. I think I will at some point. But I got to say, the people who I at least respect are the entire pacifists. The Christian pacifist, I think they're wrong, but I at least respect the consistency. The Christian who says, no, the Christian's job is to lay down his life. And so in a situation like, somebody's breaking down your door trying to kill and rape your family, in a situation like a mass shooter in a school, your job is to try to lay down your life to save your friends without causing harm, because that's another human being who's committing the evil, and that person needs to be redeemed and hear the gospel and believe, and it's not my place to be that person's judge. And so dying with dignity is the thing I'm called to do. I don't have a clear slam dunk Bible passage that says you're wrong. I think you can string together some of Jesus' phrases out of context to support your view. I think that if you view them in context, they support my view a little bit better, which is to say we live in a fallen world, and sometimes it is necessary to do heroic acts of physical harm in order to promote that which is good and kill another human being. But I gotta admit, there's at least some logical consistency and some biblical arguments to be made for the other side. That said, very few people are in that camp, so I'm going to argue with the majority here who are on the guns are evil, except for when someone I want to have a gun has a gun in the exact scenario where I want them to have a gun. Well, then what you're saying is guns are not evil. The reality is guns are amoral, not immoral. Guns are tools for a purpose. And so I'm gonna try and highlight four main things that you have to agree on if you want to actually solve this problem. Four main things that we have to actually affirm in order to find a solution to the problem of mass shootings, particularly mass shootings in schools. And the first main thing you have to agree on is guns are amoral, not immoral. Guns are things designed for a purpose. And the killing that they bring about needs to be exercised with caution by those who are responsible in the direction of those who are seeking to do evil. Continuing on the response to banning guns would stop mass shootings, my basic response is actually the second thing that we have to agree on, which is that banning guns simply won't work because guns will always be around. I would love it if guns simply didn't exist. We could just snap our fingers and every single gun in the world didn't exist and no machine was ever created in order to kill. That's not reality, and it never will be. And creating a law that bans guns is not going to bring about that reality. What it actually reveals is that you really just believe guns are evil, and we've already covered that's not quite right. Guns are amoral, not immoral. A quick sidetrack. Banning guns won't work because guns will always be around. That's my second point. My second big thing that we have to agree on, that banning guns, that's a pipe dream, that's fantasy. That's not going to bring down the total amount of people killed by mass shootings. There's a charge that could be leveled that, well, that's what you say about abortion. That's what you say about abortion. All right, so I say that we should ban abortions, but I say that we shouldn't ban guns. I was like, you're being inconsistent. Well, no. No, it's not the same thing as banning all abortions, because the gun is amoral, abortions are immoral. The government should not ban things that do not violate interpersonal morality, but they should ban things that do violate interpersonal morality, such as abortion. I do think that murder should be illegal. I don't think that guns should be illegal. That's the distinction there. So it's completely consistent to say that banning guns won't work. It won't bring about a lower death toll, and also say that banning abortion is what we should do because abortion is immoral. The first is an argument from pragmatics of, well, that's just not a possibility. The second is an argument from morality because abortion is inherently immoral. That aside, further response in the banning guns won't work because guns will always be around. I often hear this: if guns just didn't exist, he wouldn't have been able to shoot those kids. I agree. If guns didn't exist, there would be no mass shootings. But they do. Pretending as if we can live in a world where they don't is unhelpful. We need to look for actual solutions. You can't change reality. This is another little sidetrack. I find it interesting that quite often the side that argues for changing reality is the one that is against God. I think that Genesis 3 is itself a statement of you don't get to define reality. Like, that's what the fall is. Man and woman saw that what God said was not good for food is good for food. They wanted to be like God, knowing good and evil. And God knows good and evil by determining it. He says what is, and I want to say what is. And so guns just didn't exist. We could just snap our fingers and guns aren't there. Plug my fingers in my ears and whistle loudly enough. It's an expression of the fallen nature to simply claim that we can and should change reality. God controls reality. But that's a little bit of a sidetrack, so I'll try and get back on track. If all guns were banned, bad guys wouldn't be able to get them. This is continuing on the, well, you can't ban all guns. That's first of all, we're still in Fantasyland. Even in Fantasyland, right? Suppose that you could ban all guns, bad guys would still get them. For a great counterexample, Chicago. Really, really strict gun control. You can't get a gun very easily within Chicago if you are a law-abiding citizen. Has the highest gun crime rate in the nation. Additionally, LA, New York, Boston, all places have strict gun control, strict rules on who's allowed to buy them. Guns are basically banned, and bad guys still find guns. Because bad guys always find ways to get guns. If you want to ban guns, does that mean you want to make sure cops don't have guns either? Is that what you're suggesting? Are you suggesting that not only should we not have any guns in all of society, but cops also should not have guns? I think that's interesting also because I'm actually in favor of that. I'm actually in favor of largely disarming the police. From a Stevens ideal libertarian worldview, if I could remake reality, yeah, there would be no cops. And that's the ideal that I would love to move towards. Now, I recognize that that's not the reality. But again, I find it interesting that the people who are claiming that we should ban all guns are the ones who are also saying the police should have all the guns and all cops are pigs. ACAB, all cops are bad. That's the line of the left. The other line of the left is, and only they should have guns. A little bit inconsistent, no? The reason I bring this up, the fact that what you're arguing for is only for police to have guns. And bad guys. Police and bad guys are the only ones who can have guns. The reason I bring that up is that's like literally why the Second Amendment exists, is to make sure that not only police have guns. And this is my third point that we have to agree on. So the first one was guns are amoral, not immoral. Second one, guns will always be around and you cannot get rid of all of them. That's fantasy. The third one is the Second Amendment exists so that regular people can defend against tyrannical government. This is the purpose of the Second Amendment. The reason it was written in our constitutional republic was to protect the average citizen to have guns in case of tyrannical government. That's what it's in there for. And there's a few interesting quotes from like personal letters and things from the founders who wrote that line, particularly Tom Jefferson, who wrote a couple of my favorite quotes. I prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery. Yes, amen. Dangerous freedom is much, much better than peaceful slavery. I don't want safety. I want freedom. Thomas Jefferson also said in a commonplace book, the laws that forbid the carrying of arms are laws of such a nature. They disarm only those who are neither inclined to determine to commit crimes. Such laws make things worse for the assaulted and better for the assailants. They serve rather to encourage than to prevent homicides, for an unarmed man may be attacked with greater confidence than an armed man. Basic point being, if you have a gun, you're less likely to be robbed or killed. You're more able to defend yourself. Ben Franklin, they that can give up essential liberty to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Amen. George Mason, to disarm the people, that was the most effectual way to enslave them. James Madison, in the Annals of Congress, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A well-regulated militia, composed of the body of the people, trained to arms, is the best and most natural defense of a free country. Patrick Henry, in a speech to Virginia, guard with jealous attention the public liberty. Suspect everyone who approaches that jewel. Unfortunately, nothing will preserve it but downright force. Whenever you give up that force, you are ruined. The great object is that every man be armed. Everyone who is able might have a gun. They were very clear. The reason they wrote the Second Amendment was so that if your government got bad, you could shoot your government. It was a final defense, a big old warning sign. And I get this pushback a lot. You think you can fight off the whole U.S. military if it turns tyrannical? They've got F-16s. And I have to point out, look, if the U.S. government wanted to turn tyrannical and enslave its populace, or if an invading country wanted to enslave the U.S., yes, the big guns would take out the initial wave of citizens. Absolutely. If the U.S. decided it wanted to bomb its own populace, drop a nuke on Houston, it would take out a lot of people who own guns thinking that they could fight off the government. But that's the first wave. The way that reality works in time is that people react. The U.S. military would not be able to just instantly wipe every single human being off the face of the earth. At a certain point, look, scenario, right? The U.S. turns tyrannical, launches an overnight op to try and wipe out as much of the defenses of the average man as possible in the United States. Major cities get blown off the map by nukes. Centers of high gun ownership get invaded and just completely mowed down by very advanced technology. And then all of the people in the surrounding areas who own guns, who see that their government has gone tyrannical and are trying to kill them, begin to unite. They take all of their guns, they take all of the things that they own, all of those crazy gun nuts who live off in rural Mississippi and rural Texas, who own grenades and rocket launchers and sniper rifles, and people who have spent a whole lot of money waiting for that day. Some of them are going to survive, and they're going to find the other people who have survived, and they are going to organize, and they are going to launch a counterattack. At some point, if the government wants a people to enslave, it has to go around to all of the individual people and take their guns away. When Mr. Man in a black suit and Kevlar knocks on my door to try and take my gun, it's a whole lot harder for him to get it than when the F-16 is just doing a strafing run. But eventually, Mr. Man in a black suit does have to knock on my door in order to enslave me. Yes, the technology imbalance does factor in as far as the initial wave, but the long-term defense happens on the ground. And so absolutely, I think it's very important that individual citizens can and should be able to have their guns in order to stave off a tyrannical government. That said, the point of this amendment is so that you can stave off a tyrannical government, and so I actually do believe that anything that the government should be allowed to own, private citizens should be allowed to own. If you have the money and the knowledge, you should be allowed to buy a nuke. I realize that doesn't happen. People can't really do that now. But as far as the philosophical question of who should get to own it, there is no reason why the federal government should and Joe Sixpack over there shouldn't. Seen in a vacuum. I do think that there are things that you can do that remove your rights from you. That's what imprisonment is. So someone who has proved that he can't be trusted with the freedom of liberty, or the responsibility of liberty, shouldn't be allowed to. That's why I think that convicted felons, their Second Amendment rights are revoked, and they're not allowed to own guns. You're not allowed to own a gun in prison. Go figure. You're not allowed to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness if you commit heinous crimes. That's what prisons are for, and I still think absolutely libertarians do believe that prisons are a thing that should exist to incarcerate those who commit various criminal acts. Violations of interpersonal morality is how I would put it. But if you haven't done anything wrong, you should get to own an F-16. You should get to own a nuke. Anything the government can own, you should be allowed to own, because the Second Amendment protects your right to defend yourself against a tyrannical government. The guns they had back in the Second Amendment weren't like we have today. Yes, that is correct. They still had very similar guns to what we have today. Look up the Puckle gun. That's one of my favorites. It's easy to remember because it's got a funny name. Puckle gun could shoot a ton of rounds every minute, basically as many as any of your standard semi-automatic rifles could today, and they were a lot bigger. They were big guns. The founders said that you should be allowed to own cannons. That's the concept that the founders just didn't understand that technology would advance, or that they didn't understand that guns could shoot fast. No. They had the guns. They were fans of the guns that could shoot really fast and shoot really big projectiles. That was kind of their thing. So that's just not an argument. Universal background checks would stop bad guys from getting guns. Quote, universal background checks needs a definition. If what you mean is anybody who tries to legally buy a gun has to pass a background check to do it, yeah, that already exists. Anybody who wants to go to a legally licensed firearm dealer has to pass a background check every time they purchase a gun, even at gun shows. You might have heard the gun show loophole. It's not a thing. If you're a legally licensed firearm dealer selling at a gun show, you still have to run background checks on all the people who buy guns at your gun show. Everybody has to pass a background check. What you're advocating for is not a background check, actually. What you're advocating for is a universal gun registry. Because there is one situation where you don't have to have the government's involvement. It's person-to-person sales, or straw purchases is the fancy terminology for it. If I buy a gun and then I decide I don't want or need this gun anymore, and so I sell it to my friend, I am not legally required to run a background check on my friend. He's not legally required to pass a background check in order to buy it from me. I do still have to write up a little paperwork saying transfer of ownership to basically free myself from responsibility. He signs it, I sign it. So I have something to protect myself from liability in the future, but he doesn't have to pass a background check to buy a gun in this situation. If we tried to create a system where everybody who ever bought a gun in that manner, what you're saying is what you really want is you want the federal government to know where every single gun is at all times, right? You're saying, okay, I had to pass a background check to buy this gun, and then I had to go and inform the federal government that this gun went to this other person. That gun that I bought, I no longer own it. What you're arguing for is a federal gun registry, not a federal background check. And if you're saying, yes, that's what I want a federal gun registry. Well, first of all, we're back in Fantasyland, because only a small portion of law-abiding citizens would actually register their guns. Very, very few people who actually own guns would go and register them. The rest of the law-abiding citizens would not, and all of the criminals would not. So we're back in Fantasyland, the same as banning guns. You're not going to be able to ban guns, and if you want to have some sort of a registry, all you're doing is setting up the federal government to more effectively become tyrannical. If the law-abiding citizens go and register their guns so the federal government knows, okay, these are the people who are responsible, these are the people who have guns, and these are the guns that they have, I can more effectively go to that person's house and confiscate all of their big guns whenever I want to take over the nation. So a federal gun registry, really bad idea. Really bad idea. It goes directly against the heart and purpose of the Second Amendment. Background checks, they already exist. So you're arguing for current things that already exist. We should ban assault rifles and high-capacity magazines. Okay, first of all, can you define assault rifle for me, just so I know that you know what you're talking about? Because most of the people who use that word don't know what assault rifle means. Most people think that AR-15 stands for assault rifle 15, and that 15 refers to something like the amount of bullets it can shoot in a second or something like that. It has nothing to do with that. AR stands for Armalite rifle. Armalite is the name of a gun manufacturing company, and it was the 15th model that they designed. Assault rifle has a technical definition issued by our military. An assault rifle can do the following things. First, it can switch between semi-automatic and fully automatic modes. Second, it has a medium-sized power cartridge, meaning that it's like got more powder in the bullet. I'm trying to simplify for non-gun people. A round is made up of a bullet that's got a propellant of some sort of an explosive behind it inside this casing, right? So you press this button and the propellant explodes and it shoots the bullet out of the casing. So a medium-sized cartridge has more than like a handgun, but less than like a hunting rifle. Further components of the definition: it feeds ammunition from a detachable magazine, and it has an effective range of at least 330 yards. That's the definition of an assault rifle. The first part of that definition, that it can switch between fully automatic and semi-automatic modes, means that assault rifles are already banned. Fully automatic weapons are all registered with the government, as far as we know. Refer back to the whole gun registry thing. And fully automatic weapons are illegal to purchase without extreme levels of government clearance. They're heavily regulated. And just to clarify for people who don't know the difference between fully automatic and semi-automatic. Semi-automatic means you pull the trigger once and a bullet fires. Fully automatic means you pull the trigger once and a bunch of bullets fire. You might have heard terms related to guns like bolt action or pump action or lever action. That means you have to perform an action of some kind in between rounds firing. So you have to pump the shotgun, or you have to pull out the bolt and push the bolt forward. Those sorts of things are usually on rifles, which, surprisingly enough, nobody ever wants to ban, even though they're more powerful and more dangerous than most semi-automatic guns. Semi-automatic, basically every single gun you can think of, aside from various kinds of hunting rifles and shotguns, are semi-automatic. They fire one bullet, and the pulling of the trigger and the firing of the bullet causes the next bullet to reload, so that you just have to pull the trigger again and another bullet fires. That's what semi-automatic means. So semi-automatic describes basically all guns you can buy, and fully automatic guns are illegal already. So when you're talking about banning assault rifles, well, they're already banned because assault rifles are fully automatic. We're back in Fantasyland. Banning something only takes it away from the good guys, and it's not going to do anything. Banning high-capacity magazines, again, not going to do anything, but just take it away from the good guys and put more into the hands of the bad guys. Or, the other thing is, a bad guy can just carry more magazines. You're talking about high-capacity magazines. We're talking about basically stopping a guy from carrying 15 bullets in a magazine instead of 10 bullets in a magazine. Those extra 5 bullets he can carry in another 10-round magazine, or another... You're talking about solutions that aren't going to solve the problem. That's my point. Red flag laws. The idea that we should have red flag laws. Well, red flag laws would remove a person's rights without due process. Again, this is something that can be used against law-abiding citizens, and it goes against the Second Amendment. More recently, you're hearing, we should repeal gun manufacturer immunity for the misuse of a gun. Are you kidding? How nonsensical can you get when you... Again, we'll refer you back to our earlier point that guns are amoral, not immoral. Imagine if someone uses an iPhone to plan a murder. Is that Apple's fault? Imagine if a woman drops a toaster into her husband's bathtub. Is that Breville's fault? If someone commits murder with a hammer, is it DeWalt's fault? No, of course not. The gun manufacturer is not responsible for the misuse of the gun. Gun manufacturers, of course, should have immunity when somebody does something immoral with their guns. They're producing an amoral tool, and somebody is misusing it to do something evil. I don't think that we should be able to sue tobacco companies either. They were doing what they wanted, and people were freely engaging in the activity. Anyway, different off topic. We're the only country with this problem. Why can't we fix it like they did? Well, that's just not true. We're not the only country with this problem. If you look at every country in the world, we have way less gun violence than virtually any non-Western country. And compared to the Western countries, if you adjust for population, which is kind of important, If you're talking about how many people die every year from a certain thing, if you only have 10 people in your country and one of them dies, that's only one, right? But it's 10% of your population. Whereas if you have a country of, say, 330 million people and like 10 die, okay, that's not even a fraction. That's not even 1% of 1% of 1%. You have to adjust for population. And when you do, and you realize how huge the United States is and how little gun crime we actually have overall, we're kind of right in the middle of the pack. This isn't a uniquely American problem. And here's what my final number 4. So number 1, we had guns are amoral, not immoral. Number 2, we had guns will always be around and you cannot get rid of them. Number 3, the Second Amendment exists so that regular people can defend against a tyrannical government. That's the reason. Number 4, and this is the one that's most important if we want to actually find a solution. If you want to actually find a solution that will solve the actual problem that we have of mass shootings in schools, this is the most important one to recognize, that we have to agree on to find a real solution. Any law you pass restricting gun access will only restrict the gun access of those who obey the laws. If you obey laws, then laws are a solution to stopping you from having a gun. If you don't obey laws, then laws are not a solution for stopping you from having a gun. It's the argument that gets most overlooked, I think, but it's the one that is the most important to understand, that bad guys are going to come up with ways of doing bad things. When the United Kingdom passed its gun bans, knife attacks went up, and the total number of people who died stayed about the same, because bad guys are going to find ways to do bad things. Laws are only going to restrict people's access to guns if that person obeys laws. So any law you pass, if what we're talking about is the government needs to act, your laws need to account for those 4 basic facts. Guns are amoral. There will always be guns around. The Second Amendment is there to protect from tyrannical government. And any laws you pass are only going to apply to law-abiding citizens. You come to this conclusion. The answer is not to restrict gun access via the government. It is to increase gun access via the law-abiding citizens. You need to increase the amount of guns if you want to solve the problem of mass shootings in this. Actual solutions that the government can and should take, that it is within their purview to enact from a philosophically consistent point of view and from a logically consistent point of view. First of all, get rid of gun-free zones. They're stupid. They increase the chance of being hit. They make you a target, and they completely remove your ability to defend yourself when someone who looks at that sign and says, "Oh, gun-free zone. Well, I'm not going to follow that." Takes their gun in, knowing that anybody who does follow the rules isn't going to have a gun to defend themselves. So that's the first thing. Get rid of gun-free zones. It baffles me that this isn't an actual agreed upon solution. And it comes from denying that very first premise, that guns are amoral, not immoral. It's saying guns are bad, therefore we have to ban their existence in this area. Well, no, we need to recognize that guns are not inherently bad, and banning them in this certain area isn't going to help anything. Get rid of the gun-free zones. Number 2, increase punishment for those who do not store and protect their guns correctly if the gun is used in a crime. You are owning your gun and your crazy 16-year-old son gets a hold of it and uses it to go shoot somebody. You are responsible. You should bear some legal responsibility. You were supposed to have that gun for your own protection, and you let it get into the hands of someone who did something wrong. Absolutely increase the punishments for people who don't protect their guns, who don't store their guns properly, who let their guns out of their sight. Last one is going to sound really crazy, and it's going to sound completely unrelated. But a lot of people have been talking about mental health. We need to address the mental health crisis in America. As far as something that the government can do for the whole mental health crisis, the number one thing that the government could do, end no-fault divorce. Why is that? It is proven time and time again that the number one thing for the emotional and mental stability of a young person is directly related to whether or not that person has two parents in the home, a mother and a father. The statistics are overwhelming, and I realize this show isn't about that. We can do another episode about that another time, but for now, take my word for it. Go look up the statistics yourself, but two-parent homes, mother and father, always yield better mental health results than the worst single-parent homes. That's not to say that parents in single-parent situations are necessarily to blame. Sometimes they are. Lots of times they're not. A spouse dies, you've been dealt a rough hand. You have to take extra measures to try and ensure that the outcome of your child is healthy. But you want to solve the mental health crisis, end no-fault divorce. Have the government actually have a say when the interpersonal morality of violating marriage oaths comes into play. Yeah, that is actually a libertarian point of view. No-fault divorce should not exist. If the government's going to have laws about marriage, it should not have no-fault divorce. That would solve a lot of these problems. Actual solutions, though, come largely not from the government, but from individual Americans. It's from people taking responsibility for their rights. 4 action points for the average American to help with the mass shooting problem and the gun issue. 1, go to church. Go learn the gospel. Recognize that you are a sinner, rebellious against God, hating God and others. Go to church, learn this truth, and recognize that God has provided a Savior for you. His name is Jesus Christ, and that only by grace through faith can you be saved from your sin. 2, take responsibility for yourself. Make your bed, clean your room. Wake up in the morning and do something of substance. Don't become a mindless zombie who on every Saturday when you have your own time to spend, you waste it in front of video games or Netflix or whatever other thing where you zone out and produce nothing of beauty or benefit to others. Do something that you actually look back on and enjoy. I know so many guys who play video games all day or who watch TV all day on their days off, and they're miserable. And you suggest, hey, turn off the TV and go outside, go work out, go read a book, go paint something, go talk to a friend, go eat a meal, like go do, right? And there's like, no, I'm doing what I enjoy. I'm playing video games. And I'm like, come on. I'm not against video games. Like, I enjoy video games every now and then, but in moderation, in proper perspective. And when any one pleasure gets out of place, that turns into a problem. So take responsibility for yourself. Be a man. I'm again getting off track. So actual solutions that Americans can enact. Go to church. Take responsibility for yourself. Learn some basic critical thinking and stop emoting. Stop building policy off of your emotions. I know that's hard. I know that's hard to take your emotions out of the equation, particularly if you're someone who has been on the bad end of freedom. You still have to recognize that freedom is the better option. Freedom over safety is the better society. and critical thinking will lead you there. Stop emoting. Learn your logical fallacies. Argue from reason, not from desire. And fourthly, what can average Americans do to help the gun problem? Buy a gun and learn how to use it responsibly. And I'm totally serious about that. More guns is the answer to this problem. More guns in safer hands is the answer to this problem. Particularly if you have never shot a gun. Call up your gun-loving friend who you think is crazy, that guy from high school you never talked to because he's always posting pictures of his 1911 or whatever. Call him up and say, will you take me to the gun range? He will be overjoyed to do it. He will pay for the experience, I guarantee it. And you will learn so much. You will learn not to fear guns. Education about guns is the answer to the first problem of viewing guns as inherently immoral. When you recognize that this is a tool for a purpose, your perspective will change. Everybody who goes shooting comes out a little bit different than somebody who's never been shooting before. The second you learn how to operate this machine, it becomes a whole lot less scary and you can think more clearly. So if you're not quite up to buying a gun, at least going and shooting a gun in a controlled environment where you can learn what the tool is and how it is to be used, it will work wonders for your understanding of the gun control issue and how guns should be addressed. That's the bulk of the meat segment. What I wanted to do, what I realized halfway through I could do with some ease, is just play Joe Biden's recent address post the most recent shootings and just walk through it and show how he makes all of these bad arguments. And then we'll just briefly respond to each of them with those four things, right? It's going to be either, one, guns are amoral, not immoral. Two, guns will always be around. You can't get rid of them. So arguing for bans is pointless. Three, the Second Amendment exists so that regular people can defend against a tyrannical government. And four, any law you pass restricting gun access will only restrict the gun access of those who obey laws. And basically everything he says comes back to one of those 4 points, with one exception, which we'll talk about when it comes up. But here we go. I figured since this is what it is, we're gonna, because I love the bump, we're gonna introduce this with Old Man Joe.
And I see like an old man.
The big difference between mostly dead and all dead. Please open his mouth.
Old Man Joe, what you gonna tell me? Old Man Joe, what you gonna say?
As we entered those hallowed grounds, we saw rows and rows of crosses among the rows of headstones with other emblems of belief, honoring those who paid the ultimate price on battlefields around the world. The day before, we visited Uvalde, Texas. In front of Robb Elementary School, we stood before 21 crosses for 19 third and fourth graders and 2 teachers. On each cross, a name, and nearby, a photo of each victim that Jill and I reached out to touch. Innocent victims murdered in a classroom that had been turned into a killing field. Standing there in that small town, like so many other communities across America, I couldn't help but think there are too many other schools, too many other everyday places that have become killing fields, battlefields, here in America. We stood at such a place just 12 days before, across from a grocery store in Buffalo, New York, memorializing 10 fellow Americans, a spouse, a parent, a grandparent, a sibling, gone forever. At both places, we spent hours with hundreds of family members who were broken, whose lives will never be the same. They had one message for all of us: do something. Just do something. For God's sake, do something. After Columbine, after Sandy Hook, after Charleston, after Orlando, after Las Vegas, after Parkland. Nothing has been done.
Okay, you probably have already noticed the first problem. Right. Do something. Nothing has been done. Okay, get specific. Thankfully, he goes on to be specific. So let's listen to some of the things he proposes as possible somethings that could be done. But just simply do something is arguing from emotion. It's not a great basis of policy. So let's hear his policy prescriptions.
This time that can't be true. This time we must actually do something. The issue we face is one of conscience and common sense.
Conscience and common sense. Okay, I agree. The issue is one of conscience and common sense. So let's get some common sense proposals. Something that will actually decrease or affect the problem. Propose a solution to the actual issue.
For so many of you at home, I want to be very clear. This is not about taking away anyone's guns. It's not about vilifying gun owners.
Oh, old man Joe. You heard. Okay, we won't waste time by going back and listening to him stumble. But it's not about taking away people's guns. Okay, if that's not what it's about, I assume what you're saying is you're not going to take away people's guns then, right? You're not going to propose anything that's talking about banning guns of any kind, right? Because that would be taking away people's guns if that's right. Basic logic.
In fact, we believe we should be treating responsible gun owners as an example of how every gun owner should behave. I respect the culture and the tradition and the concerns of lawful gun owners. At the same time, the Second Amendment, like all other rights, is not absolute.
Okay, I agree. If you just like all other rights, if you violate the law in a certain way, your right could be taken away from you. Is that what you mean by the Second Amendment is not absolute?
It was Justice Scalia who wrote, and I quote, "Like most rights, the rights granted by the Second Amendment are not unlimited. Not unlimited."
And what he meant by limited, I disagree with what he meant by limited in that opinion, but what I would say is, yeah, they're limited by your actions. Like, you're allowed to have a gun. If you shoot someone in the face with it, guess what? Your right goes away. You don't get to own a gun anymore. If you have a right to free speech. If you use that speech to slander someone or to call out a hit on someone, like that speech is not protected free speech. You're allowed to have and exercise your rights so long as they do not violate interpersonal morality. That's how I put it. That's what it's limited by. What are your limits, Joe?
It never has been. There have always been limitations on what weapons you can own in America.
Such as?
For example, machine guns have been federally regulated for nearly 90 years.
And you said always. Like, one sentence to the next. There have always been limitations. For example, 90 years of limitations. That's not always. And so let's go ahead and say always from the conception of the Constitution. Okay, 90 years the government's been wrong about particular limitations. What does that show?
And this is still a free country.
Oh, okay, I'll let that one go.
This isn't about taking away anyone's rights. It's about protecting children.
Hey, did you hear that? Just to make sure you always hear the appeal. A drum I beat a lot. Freedom is more important than safety. Did you hear it? It's not about taking away someone's rights. It's about protecting children. It's not about your freedom. It's about safety. We always have to frame the issue in terms of promoting safety as opposed to promoting freedom. And that's the wrong approach. That is not the American way. That is not the Christian way. That is not the good way. That is the wrong way. He gets a little more explicit later. So.
It's about protecting families. It's about protecting whole communities. It's about protecting our freedom to go to school, to a grocery store, to a church.
You hear the way it's about protecting our freedom to go to a grocery school or So it's about safety. It's not about freedom. It's about safety. And no, your policy needs to promote freedom. That's your job. That's your job in the federal government, to promote freedom. It's my job to worry about my safety. It's your job to worry about my freedom. That's it. When you get that confused, when you start thinking that it's the government's job to protect safety, you're in a bad place. That's where both freedom and safety go out the window and you become enslaved. We'll keep moving.
Without being shot and killed. According to new data just released by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, guns are the #1 killer of children in the United States of America. The #1 killer. More than car accidents, more than cancer.
More than cancer or car accidents, maybe the #1 killer, no, but again, not really necessary to work through that. There are many other higher killers than guns.
Over the last 2 decades, more school-age children have died from guns than on-duty police officers and active duty military combined.
Objection, relevance?
Think about that. More kids than on-duty cops killed by guns. More kids than soldiers killed by guns. For God's sake, how much more carnage are we willing to accept?
I find it interesting that you point out that comparison. More kids killed than cops or soldiers by guns. Do you know what cops and soldiers both have in order to protect themselves? Guns. That there's another correlation. Perhaps the fact that cops can protect themselves with equal force and soldiers can protect themselves with equal force factors in to their ability to not die from guns, even though they unquestionably encounter more guns on a regular basis. That would suggest that it's not the gun that's the problem. It's the defense that's the problem. When you remove defense from people, or if you remove people who are willing to defend the defenseless, you end up with more victims.
How many more innocent American lives must be taken before we say enough? Enough.
You think if you repeat it, it suddenly makes sense? Okay, that's not an argument. Policy prescriptions, let's hear them.
I know that we can't prevent every tragedy.
That's good.
But here's what I believe we have to do. Here's what the overwhelming majority of American people believe we must do. Here's what the families in Buffalo and Uvalde in Texas told us we must do. We need to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines.
Okay, well, we've already heard that banning guns won't work because guns will always be around. Next suggestion.
And if we can't ban assault weapons, then we should raise the age to purchase them from 18 to 21.
Okay, that's actually interesting. Correct, you can't ban assault weapons, right? So I love that he proposes this thing and then he immediately says, that's not a reality, we can't do that, so let's raise the age. Okay, that's something you actually do have control over. You currently set the age. I think the age should be lowered, but you're saying that we should raise it to 21. I'm assuming you're picking the age 21 because that's currently the age at which we require you to purchase alcohol. You're going to have to get some consistency there. If you want this to be a real argument, like we need to raise the age to 21, okay, if that's the case, we need to raise the legal adult age of consent for everything to 21 then. You can't smoke, you can't drive, you can't drink, you can't buy a gun, you can't go to war or get drafted to go to war. You can't be held responsible for anything as an adult until you're 21, if that's going to be what we're going to do. In that case, at least you're being consistent. I don't think that's really going to help the situation. I think the better thing is to lower the age of all of those things and promote responsibility and families and teaching people responsibly. There really is a good example of this. So with alcohol. Alcohol is something that can and does get abused a lot here in the States. Doesn't happen as much over in Europe. And one big difference, I think, between the two is the culture of alcohol. The government doesn't have a legal drinking age over there as long as you are with family. And I think it's the minimum drinking age is 18 legally in some countries, and in other countries there just isn't one. people have a lot healthier relationship with alcohol in places where there is no drinking age and where there are strong families. Because people are raised in an environment where they understand the danger of this thing and they can use it responsibly. They're taught responsibility as they grow. And then it doesn't have this allure of the thing that is restricted, and you don't have this culture of, well, we're doing something that's bad and wrong, and when we're finally set free, we go and we abuse the privilege. Like there's not as much of a frat party culture in Europe because these kids have been drinking since they're 12 and 11 and 10, and like alcohol's just kind of always been part of their lives, and they're more healthy in their relationship to it. And I think that something similar applies to guns and to everything that we currently put a higher age limit on. But at least raising the age limit to purchase a gun is something that you actually have a right to do, something that you could do, and that might actually address the issue at hand, considering that a lot of the mass shooters in schools are below the age of 21, but over the age of, say, 15. That's at least something to talk about. So props for one interesting argument.
Strengthen background checks. Enact safe storage law and red flag laws.
Hey, safe storage laws. Hey, that's something that I agree with. Hey, number two good things. Red flag laws, terrible idea. Strengthen background checks. Well, what do you mean by strengthen? Because we already do background checks. So you're talking about nothing. But safe storage laws, okay, yeah. I think what you're saying is if your gun gets taken and used improperly, you're responsible. I agree.
Repeal the immunity that protects gun manufacturers from liability.
What? You went from something very reasonable, like safe storage laws, to punish gun makers? Ugh.
Address the mental health crisis, deepening the trauma of gun violence and as a consequence of that violence.
That sentence was not a sentence, but I think what you're saying is address mental health issues. And again, I agree. The way that you as a government can do that is end no-fault divorce. But I don't think that's what you mean. I think what you mean is spend lots of money.
These are rational, common sense measures.
Oh, gotta love that. Just if you call something reasonable, that makes it reasonable, right? That's common sense, right? Well, no. You just said that you should punish DeWalt for making hammers. I know that's not what you said, but that's what the equivalent of what you just said, logically speaking. Somebody hurt somebody with a hammer. We need to sue DeWalt. They shouldn't exist. Sloppy logic, Joe.
Here's what it all means. It all means this. We should reinstate the assault weapons ban on high-capacity magazines that we passed in 1994 with bipartisan support in Congress and the support of law enforcement. 9 categories of semi-automatic weapons were included in that ban, like AK-47s and AR-15s.
Okay, I don't have time to go into this because I'm already way over time for my episode, but suffice it to say, the assault weapons ban, quote-unquote, in 1994 didn't do anything, and that's why when it expired, the Republicans said, let's not keep this going because it's not doing anything. The evidence shows it. And we need to move on, but the rest of his speech you can go and find on the YouTubes. YouTube is currently promoting it because if you search anything gun control, the first 6 results are going to be Joe Biden's speech. And you can see how they all boil back down to guns are bad or we have to ban guns, completely denying the recognition that the Second Amendment exists in order to prevent a tyrannical government. This has been Old Man Joe.
And I see like an old man.
The big difference between mostly dead and all dead. Please open his mouth.
Old Man Joe, what you gonna tell me? Old Man Joe, what you gonna say?
And it looks as though we're in for a splendid afternoon sport on this, the 127th Upper Class Twit of the Year show. And there's a big crowd here today to see these prize idiots in action.
One of the Twitter posts I saw recently was a kid throws a the kid on the playground throws a rock at another kid on the playground. The teacher gives rocks to all the kids, since, after all, only a good kid with a rock can stop a bad kid with a rock. Oh. Except that that's not true. That only a good kid with a rock can stop a bad kid with a rock. It is basically true that only a good guy with a gun can stop a bad guy with a gun. Because, when the good guys show up and they're trying to stop the mass shooter, you know what they all do? They all use guns. So this is a complete false equivalence. And on top of that, I love that you're putting it on kids. I am a strong proponent of allow teachers to carry their firearms. I think it's ridiculous that teachers in many states and many localities are prevented from carrying the guns that they already carry in regular life. In the state of Texas, in every public, I'm fairly certain every public school, you have to get specific special permission from the particular institution to carry on the premises of a school. This is true in a couple of different places, hospitals, bars, etc., etc. You are prevented explicitly from carrying your gun that you would normally carry in everyday life. And I'm talking about people who actually do have a gun and they carry it all the time, regularly, because they want to be prepared. If that person is a teacher, he is not allowed to carry at school. And so the number one policy thing that I promote is universally remove the ability of people to stop someone from carrying a gun in public schools, public places. You have your rights to keep and bear arms, and you should be allowed to carry at school if you're a teacher. This would solve the problem. I'm specifically not talking about arming all the teachers. Right? I'm not saying put a gun in the hands of every inexperienced teacher. No. Someone who already owns a gun, already carries a gun in regular life, already has accepted the responsibility of carrying a gun. Let that person carry at school too. The anti-gun lobby is saying, no, that's the worst idea. We can't. That would be terrible. Again, falling back to the first premise of guns themselves are immoral. They do not understand that guns are amoral, not immoral. But that aside, I love this. We're not talking about, allowing the kids or arming the teachers. We're talking about the kids themselves. Arm the kids. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, this isn't a straw man at all. A kid on the playground throws a rock at another kid on the playground and the teacher gives rocks to all the kids. That's not a straw man. I'm saying give guns to every kid at school. That's it. You got me. That's exactly my argument. That's what I want. This has been Twitface.
And it looks as though we're in for a splendid afternoon sport on this, the 127th Upper Class Twit of the Year show. And there's a big crowd here today to see these prize idiots in action.
There was a video that was circulating on the TikToks about, so just to set it up to let you understand this guy's just walking around talking to drunk people. And he grabs these two young college girls who are obviously out getting drunk and asks these two ladies if they would rather have $100 cash or a Bitcoin. So this is their response. Here we go.
$100 cash or a Bitcoin.
23. Okay, what would you rather take? $100 cash or a Bitcoin?
I gotta say $100 cash. $100 cash every single time.
Why?
Bitcoin is a little fake to me, not gonna lie. I first of all don't know what Bitcoin is. Second of all, it seems like a scam. Like,
but it's at $40,000.
No,
I
don't give a shit. $100 cash. $40,000. What is that? Dollars. What are we getting? We're getting straight dollars. Like $100 cash in my hand feels way more tangible and way more real than like Bitcoin. Like I don't even know what Bitcoin is. Like I don't.
So their response is, I'd rather have the $100 cash because Bitcoin doesn't seem real. To try and put some kind of coherence to their view. So first I'm going to say this. We need to recognize these two young ladies represent the average. Most people, while the average person might hear the question $100 cash or a Bitcoin, and they would be smart enough to take the Bitcoin because it's worth $40,000. What they're revealing is that people care about what they feel, not about the facts. You heard him say, $100 cash feels a lot more real. Bitcoin seems fake. Bitcoin seems kind of fake to me. That's a lesson you should learn about people. Everybody needs to learn this about people. That people act based on their emotions, unfortunately, myself included, not based on reason. We should encourage people towards acting on reason, not on emotion. But that's the first thing you can learn from this video. It's funny, it's haha, we're going to make fun of these two young ladies because they're going to take $100 when they could have $40,000 in the form of Bitcoin. They could just turn right around and sell that Bitcoin and have way more money. But I want to point out what they feel is inaccurate, and not because $100 is less than $40,000. What they are feeling is inaccurate because $100 is just as unreal as Bitcoin. Both of these things are fake. Money itself, currency, is just agreed upon language to communicate value. Money, to put it this way, money doesn't actually exist. Money is some sort of a unit that we said, let's just use the word units instead of dollars, okay? The way that money came about was some guy over here who's got a bunch of fish wants some flour from that guy over there who grows wheat. And he says to that guy over there who's got wheat, he's like, hey, can I have some of that wheat? I'll give you some fish. And the guy with wheat's like, how many fish are you going to give me? I'm like, well, okay, I'll give you 10 fish for like 3 bushels of wheat or something. And this exchange was had. And then somewhere along the line, somebody came along and said, hey, what if there was like this agreed upon language that we're going to call units, that we all agree, okay, 1 fish is worth 10 units and 1 bushel of wheat is worth 10 units. Then we can just trade the units, and we all recognize like, okay, so we get the units, and then we don't have to try and figure out how many fish is worth this much wheat. Is it worth that much stone? Is worth this much ink? Is worth that much water? Or whatever you're trading. We have this baseline agreed upon statement of value, right? I know that 10 units is worth that many fish, and I know that 10 units is worth that much wheat, and so I know that 10 units is worth this much rock. Like, think of Settlers of Catan, if that helps you. Money is just that. Money is just everybody has agreed this much of my time is worth this many dollars. And so this many dollars is what I'm willing to spend on that thing. Like it's a way of communicating this is what I value and putting it into some sort of an itemized amount so that you can trade it. Bitcoin is just as fake as dollars. Both of them are based on nothing. Both of them are based on perceived value, collectively ascribed value. They are not worth anything in and of themselves. Right? $100 is not worth the material upon which $100 is made. The paper for a $100 bill is a lot less than $100. The agreed upon value, the collective agreement that I'm going to trade you this for that is what money is. And Bitcoin, at certain times, people collectively agree that I'm going to give you 40,000 American dollars for 1 Bitcoin, and other times they're like, I'm only going to give you 9,000 American dollars for 1 Bitcoin. Either way, it's collectively ascribed value. The reason we currently trade in dollars instead of Bitcoin is because it's more stable. More people can across time recognize what one, quote, dollar is worth to them, how many hours of their time, how much capital is equal to their time and their efforts and their products that they're trading. That's rapidly not becoming the case. The dollar is becoming weaker and less stable. Thanks, Joe. And so absolutely recognize this about money and play it to your advantage. Get the Bitcoin when it's worth 40,000 units and then trade it for something of actual inherent value so that later you can sell that thing that has inherent value for more units when the units are fluctuating. This is basic monetary policy for people who haven't thought about it before. You're welcome. We're going to go ahead and wrap up with him hype. Hymn for the day is Not What These Hands Have Done by Horatius Bonar, composer Norman Johnson. We sang this hymn in church, and I was struck by the words. It's one that I'd heard once or twice before, but I was reminded how great it is. And so here we go. The History of the Protestant Church, reading from 101 More Hymn Stories by Kenneth Osbeck. The history of the Protestant Church in Scotland is most interesting and noteworthy. With the spread of the 16th century Protestant Reformation movement throughout Great Britain and the effort of reformer John Knox, the Presbyterian Church became the established government-supported and controlled Church of Scotland. This church was strongly dominated by a rigid Calvinistic system of theology and practice, believing, for example, that the only acceptable praise to be offered to God must be the Psalms or the exact words taken directly from the Scriptures. The Church of Scotland did not even allow organs to be used in its kirks until 1874, and never published a hymnal until 1898. It was not until the evangelical revival began to stir in the 19th century and the desire was intensified to have independent churches that a significant change occurred in Scotland's religious climate. By 1840, through the leadership of a Dr. Thomas Chalmers, more than 200 independent churches were established throughout the land. In 1843, a renewed spirit of revolt against the government-controlled established church began, and the disruption resulted in the separation of the evangelical faction from the established church and the organization of the Free Church of Scotland. After several more defections from the established church, a merger of these dissenting groups resulted in the formation of the United Presbyterian Church. This merged body, in turn, became united with the Free Church movement in 1900 and the designation of the United Free Church of Scotland. Shortly, the government released its control over all of the churches, and since 1929, the Scottish churches have been known with the one title, the Church of Scotland. This unified church is now uses the common hymnal, the Church Hymnary, first compiled in 1898 and later revised in 1927 and again in 1968. One of the most respected and influential leaders of the 1843 revolt against the established church and the resultant rise of the independent church movement was Horatius Bonar. Bonar became known as an evangelical preacher of great renown, as well as the most eminent of all Scottish hymn writers. Following his education at the University of Edinburgh and his ordination to the ministry in 1838, Bonar began his pastoral work at the parish church of Kelso, near the English border. Here he labored zealously for 27 years. When the split occurred in the established church in 1843, Bonar associated himself with the Free Church movement, and his Kelso congregation became a center of evangelical influence. During this time, Bonar also edited the Border Watch, a periodical which did much to foster the Free Church spirit. At the height of his career at Kelso, Horatius Bonar was persuaded to become pastor of the large Chalmers Memorial Church in Edinburgh, a prestigious free church erected in honor of Dr. Thomas Chalmers, the early pioneer and first moderator of this movement. Here, Bonar ministered faithfully for another 23 years until his death on July 31st, 1889. Several years before his death, Dr. Bonar was honored with the moderatorship of the Church General Assembly. It is said that Bonar's death was mourned throughout Christendom as much as that of any man of his generation. Horatius Bonar was known throughout his ministry as a most able Bible student, especially in the area of eschatology and premillennial prophecy. For 25 years, he edited the Quarterly Journal of Prophecy, in which he would also include one of his newly written hymn texts. In addition, Bonar was a prolific writer of evangelistic tracts and devotional booklets, as well as more than 600 hymn texts, many of which are still in general use. Dr. Bonar was highly respected throughout his life as a man of wide scholarship and culture. It was said of him that his mind was saturated with the scriptures, and his heart was possessed by a faith far broader and more generous than the strict Calvinist creed, to which his intellect gave assent. He loved children, and for them many of his hymns were specially written. He stated that his purpose for writing was to fill my hymns with the love and light of Christ. His remarkable ministry was characterized by earnest zeal, devotion, and a concern for soul winning. His many-faceted life was observed by some who said that he was always visiting, while others said he was always preaching. Some thought that he was always writing, and many thought he was always praying. Bonar's wife of 40 years, the former Jane Lundy, was also a gifted writer who penned the beautiful hymn text, "Fade, fade, each earthly joy." It is interesting that even though Bonar was a highly esteemed free church preacher and hymn writer, he did not use his own human composure hymns with his own worship services until the very close of his active ministry, since his congregation still insisted on singing only the Psalms. Yet it was Bonar who encouraged the use of gospel songs when they were introduced by D. L. Moody and Ira Sankey in the Scottish Evangelistic Crusade meetings. Bonar actually wrote several gospel songs for Sankey to use during these meetings in Great Britain. Other popular hymns by Horatius Bonar still in use in our hymnals today are "I Heard the Voice of Jesus Say," and the communion hymn, "Here, O my Lord, I See Thee Face to Face." "Not What These Hands Have Done" first appeared in Bonar's collection, Hymns of Faith and Hope, with the title "Salvation Through Christ Alone." It is a clear reflection of his strong Calvinistic theology that man's only basis for God's favor and salvation rests solely on the finished work of Christ. I wanted to read the lyrics to "Not What These Hands Have Done." Not what these hands have done can save this guilty soul. Not what this toiling flesh has borne can make my spirit whole. Not what I feel or do can give me peace with God. Not all my prayers and sighs and tears can bear my awful load. Thy work alone, O Christ, can ease this weight of sin. Thy blood alone, O Lamb of God, can give me peace within. Thy love to me, O God, not my poor love to thee, can rid me of this dark unrest and set my spirit free. Oh, I love that line. Thy love to me, O God, not my poor love to thee. It's not that you love God, it's that God first loved you. Amen. Keep going. Thy grace alone, O God, to me can pardon speak, can rid me, thy power alone, O Son of God, can this sore bondage break. I bless the Christ of God, I rest on love divine, and with unfaltering lip and heart I call this Savior mine. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Great statement of the gospel, of salvation by grace alone, through faith alone. Amen. Amen. If you wouldn't mind sharing the show with your friends, I'd appreciate it. Message a friend right now. Before you, don't hit pause yet. Don't wait, there's something important. Don't hit pause yet. Right now, open your text messages, copy the link to reasonedrefrain.com and send it to at least 3 people. Right? Do the work. Help me out. And then never, ever, ever send questions or comments or things to talk about on the show, like the one I'm going to talk about next week that a listener wrote in about talking about "In God We Trust" on the coins. Yeah, we're going to talk about that next week. So don't ever send things because I hate it, and I'll never include it on the show like I will next week. Don't send them to Stephen at reasonedrefrain.com. That's Stephen, STEPHEN at reasonedrefrain, REASONEDREFRAIN.com. Colossians 3:16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. You'll hear me next time unless Jesus comes back before then. Reasoned Refrain is produced by Stephen Curto. The views and opinions expressed in this episode are my own and should not be taken as reflective of any institution with which I am associated. Theme song written and performed by J.J. Anderson and Stephen Curto, mastered by J.J. Anderson. Reasoned Refrain is the property of Stephen Curto, all rights reserved.